Welcome to Stellar Strategy Gaming. This is Mara and Ben. Today we're going to be talking about engaging your players. A while back I had posted a question to the Dungeon Crafts Facebook community about what they would like to say in a video about DMing for noobs, and a really popular response was engaging your players, which I think is so important, and Mara seems to agree, that we decided to do an entire video about how to figure out what it is your players want.
Yes, now the first step is a fairly simple one, though to many it might seem revolutionary, which is ask the players before you start your game what they want to see, And a lot of the times the players won't actually respond very clearly because they're not used to DMs asking like this. I personally think that that's actually a problem with DMing as a whole, is that a lot of DMs seem to think that the story is about them, not the players, but that's a subject for another video. For the moment, the best solution, if they give you that blank, dead stare at the question, would be to switch to what is their favorite TV show, or novel, or movie, or whatever it is, because that'll give you a very good idea of what kind of plot lines they like, and what kind of overall sort of story and world they find most intriguing, and that could go a very long way to just pulling them in just a little bit more, especially if you show that you actually do value your character's opinions within the world.
On my first campaign, I basically decided to do it as though I was writing a novel. I wrote the world of the campaign. I had a couple of possible adventures in mind for the players. I specifically wrote this around a time period in history that I find especially fascinating, which is the Bronze Age collapse. The problem was that because I had it all written out, it put the players in a situation where they were trying to navigate within a pre-made sort of world that was still something shy of a railroad, so it created this weird 50-50 situation where it was neither a sandbox nor a railroad. In the campaign I'm running now, I set it after the collapse with much more freedom for the players to go places and do things they want to do rather than necessarily have it be predetermined. And I didn't completely fill out the world. I filled out the immediate area where the players are existing, but I did not fill out the whole world, so I can rewrite it as need be depending on what the players want to do. Less can be more, especially when it comes to dumping lore on players and dumping things like powerful magical items that change the course of the story.
Yes. Now, DMs beware, because this next bit is something which a lot of people don't seem to understand, which is that if you're not careful and sort of respectful about a person's character, and you kill them off too quickly, or sort of check them out of the story without building up to it, or without asking for the player's consent in doing this, that is a very good way to make the player just go, alright, I'm spending the rest of the session on my phone now. The example which always comes to mind here is my absolute favorite dungeon, which is Tomb of Horrors, which is just one of the worst dungeons ever made. But one of the interesting things about it is that there are a series of traps throughout the entirety of the dungeon. These traps do not do damage to your players. These traps teleport you back to the beginning of the dungeon without any of your equipment, with your gender swapped and your alignment swapped. And I do mean completely reversed. So if you're neutral, that's the only way you're safe. And even then, if you're lawful or chaotic, it still affects you. So this is obviously a very bad thing to do, because it's changing your characters in a fundamental fashion. And while the removal of equipment and the gender swap are not cool either, and I don't approve of them as DM tricks, the fact that you're changing the alignment, which is one of the fundamental building blocks of a character, without their permission, instantly, without a saving throw, no nothing, these traps the player walks into. There is no saving throw for these, and that is a theme throughout this dungeon, for the record. That's not cool. That's not something any DM should ever do, because if I were a player in that situation, I'd say, right, I'm done. I'm just done.
Yes, if you have any kind of investment in the character you make, if it's a one-shot, we're doing Tomb of Annihilation, and this is coming, then I could see it being acceptable because the player has agreed to it ahead of time. But if you're doing something like this and it's somebody that they're the player is invested in the character's backstory and the character's history and who that character is as a person, yeah, just as Mara said, not great. Now, if you want to do something like that where the player character is being turned into a different alignment, you can absolutely do that, and it can be fascinating and very compelling. For example, you could have a setting where a village is about to be wiped out by whatever, orcs or goblins or were-gnomes. I don't care. Point is, in this situation, you could have something like maybe a demon from the abyss or a devil from the nine hells who is offering help, maybe offering enchanted weapons, maybe offering to intervene directly to save the village. But every time the players accept help, their alignment is subtly shifting toward the opposite direction. Or if you're playing evil party, then it could be a celestial who's doing the same thing to draw the players into the side of the light. But what's important there is that you're giving players options. You're giving them choices. They can say, well, we'll go this far but no farther, or they can say, absolutely not. We'll not accept any help from the other side, or some kind of middle. Whatever it is, make the players a part of it, and make sure to honor it if the players make those kinds of changes. Make sure to make it really matter. Also, when you do this, as you're going through this, make sure that the characters and the players playing them have a reason to care. It doesn't always have to be about a sandbox. The classic We Be Goblins campaign from Pathfinder that I've seen imported to D&D is an obvious railroad, but it's a fun railroad, and it's a railroad where you can get really invested in your silly goblin or your savage goblin or however your group is playing your goblins.
Yes. Now, one very important question here is a were-gnome a man who turns into a gnome or a gnome who turns into a man? But that's a question for another time, I do believe. The thing that really helps with all of this is to tie everything together with tiny little details as well. If your character wrote a page of backstory, and I'm not talking about the 7-page person that is at every session. If someone has written a simple page worth of backstory about a drow, for example, then as a DM, what you should do is read over that real quick, and then, there's some goons tracking after them because he stole their pet fox or whatever it is. Then have those goons occasionally notice the fact that a drow is sticking out like a sore thumb in the middle of a human city, That those kinds of things will really make it obvious to your players that you do care about them.
For the record, a were-gnome is actually a person who periodically on the full moon turns into the city of Nome, Alaska. As important it is for the players to care about their characters and about the setting, it's also important for them to care about the villain. They have to want to defeat the villain, but it also helps if the villain has a somewhat, for lack of a better expression, human aspect. A good example of this is Dracula in Castlevania. He's doing horrible things. He's destroying an entire country, but you also see that he has, or at least had, a good side. He had a wife who was murdered, and that's the purpose of his invasion and conquest is revenge, and there is some sense that maybe this character could possibly be redeemed or not. But in any case, he's more than evil guy is evil.
Yes, and some of my favorite examples, just real quick, is in the amazing show Deep Space Nine, which everyone should watch. In the final seasons, a new Cardassian sort of takes over as a puppet leader. I forget his name, unfortunately, just off the top of my head. But he becomes a drunk, and he's clearly not enjoying anything. And then at a certain point, he just makes the final decision, like, no, I've had enough of this Dominion rule. And he stops drinking. And the Dominion soldier who's stationed there actually comments on it almost with a terrified voice as he realizes that the guy has gotten his confidence back for the first time. That's a great way to do a villain who becomes the hero or the anti-hero as well. Similarly, the earlier Cardassian loses his daughter, so there is a human aspect to why he goes insane. But going forward with all of that, the next most important thing is to make sure that the villain is always staying very much in character as well. It's a problem I had with Darth Vader from the Star Wars series, is while Darth Vader is definitely one of the best characters, and I can't believe I'm saying the words, even prequels Vader is still actually a decent character if you can look past the bad dialogue. The fact is that in the original trilogy, pre-prequels, he decides to help Luke kill the Emperor. And I just don't feel like that made a lot of sense. Now, with the prequels, that did make a bit more sense, because he wanted to help his children survive at all costs and such, and that's why he sort of became Vader. But without that information, just in the original trilogy, Vader is this longtime apprentice of Palpatine who saved his life. Vader is the ruler of a galactic empire in effect, because Palpatine doesn't leave his chair. Vader and Luke have fought to the point where Vader casually cuts off Luke's arm. I could see maybe Vader opening a side door for Luke to escape the Death Star, but I really don't see him risking his life for this person who he has been more than fine to nearly kill repeatedly throughout the entirety of the franchise.
Yes, and now that we've covered some of the general broader themes of building your characters, building your world, and building your villain, we're going to talk a little bit about the day-to-day aspects of things. One of the things that causes players to check out, I've seen it many times, I've experienced it myself. If your character doesn't have anything to do, and if your character's actions are having no effect on the setting, then you will check out. A good example of this is if you build an optimized fighter type that doesn't have any diplomacy skills, you can find yourself in the position where if you have a session with no combat, you're not doing anything and you're not having any effect on anything. You're leaving all of the diplomacy to characters like bards and warlocks that have high charisma. There are a few ways a DM can get around this. One of them is you don't always have to require a check for everything. A character can just walk up to somebody and ask a question and have the person answer it. You don't have to have a charisma score or a charisma roll of 20 for me to give you directions to get somewhere, or for me to just share general information. And I think that you should always reward players who are active in the role play. And no, I do not mean inspiration. Inspiration is actually one of my least favorite mechanics in the game because it comes across very subjectively. But if a player is really active, really involved, reward that player. Make people recognize him. Your fighter with low charisma, when he does have to make that charisma roll because he's been talking to everybody in town, maybe give him advantage on it because people know him. You can really do a lot with characters without necessarily always relying on the stats and the dice. This is inherently a creative game.
Yes, and for the record, the comment about how you do not need to roll to ask someone for directions is a direct reference to a previously mentioned character named Dimitri the Twin, who asked someone for directions. The DM made me roll. I rolled a nat 1, and I took 2 damage, which not only made me completely check out, but it's also out of character for my character to not have hit back. So just for every single reason, I was done at that point with that campaign. But going forward, the other thing is that a DM, it's a DM's job, really, to be the moderator, to be the person who keeps order and keeps things moving along and keeps things civil, really. And I don't just mean civil as in people aren't shouting at each other. I mean civil as in everyone gets an opportunity to speak and everyone's ability to do so is recognized. I, for a while, was very quiet and nervous in some earlier games, and so it was very hard for me to sort of speak up. But I do remember that one great DM said, hey, it's his turn, let him speak, and that meant the world to me at the time. It's the DM's job to step in, not just stand by. Other good examples of this are if you start speaking on someone else's turn and you just interrupt them, well, obviously that's a problem. It's very disrespectful, and on top of that, you could be ruining what the other person's about to do. You see this a lot with rules lawyers especially. But then sort of the final thought on this part is that if you have a situation where the characters are making a decision, where the players have to decide to go right or left or whatever it is, then it is not your job to just sit back and put your feet up while they debate with each other for the next hour and a half about what the correct direction is. And I'm not even joking, your players will do that at least once if you let them. No, your job is to add outside variables which push them to make some sort of choice. And you don't have to be biased about this. It might be easier for your story if you are, but if you just want to roll on it and then add a variable from the DM chart or whatever it is, you can do that too. Wild magic is a great way to push things along. And also, again, for the players checking out, if I'm debating with Ben for an hour about whether or not we should go right or left, I've completely forgotten about the campaign. I'm no longer interested in the campaign. I'm interested in winning the argument, so I'm kind of checked out.
And I will guarantee that there will be at least one player at the table who has completely stopped paying attention to anything that's going on, because it's usually two who are having the debate. And there's always going to be that one who's going to say, you know what, let's go left. I'm just picking left, let's go left. And if the conversation continues beyond that, that player is losing interest and they're getting frustrated and they don't want to be there anymore. So by risking the conflict with the players who want to have the prolonged discussion about right or left, you are helping out everyone else at the table. One thing I do want to clarify, though, is that occasionally you will have that player who is just completely cool with sitting there and kind of watching the game happen. I've been that person. Sometimes other people are just doing great and fun and interesting and wonderful things. So your job as the DM is to give that person the opportunity. Hey, Ben, is there anything you want to be doing at this moment? If I'm just vibing and I'm just saying like, hey, you know what? No, I'm good with what's happening. It is not your job as the DM to force me to do something unless the story specifically calls or requires my character to do something. I think the final theme for today, the overall theme for today, is give your players some agency, even in a railroad campaign. Let them have a little bit of influence on how things are going. Let them have a little bit of interaction with the villain besides rolling dice to hit each other. Let it be their story. And a good story, the characters make the story, not the other way around. Next time, we're going to be doing a video on Kalashtar and Shifters, Eberron's weird spirit and nature influenced peoples. We thank you so much for watching, and we hope to catch you on the next one. Please like and subscribe for more.